We're going to talk about IT security. I think we could keep this really short because the only thing you really need to understand is don't use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as your password. If you've got that down, you're good. Are we done? All right. So I get the impression with security that in the context of digital signage, what really worries people is this idea that's been around for a long time, not the idea, it's happened, where porn videos end up on screens or other naughty stuff ends up on screens, or I've seen terrorist messages, everything else. That's bad, but there are much bigger, broader issues than that. I think people need to worry about what this means if you're not really locking down your system in terms of basically opening a side door into a company's business systems and everything else. Is that a fair assessment, Craig?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did a study recently, actually, on cybersecurity across all of our platforms, including signage and kiosks. And I made some notes down here. So you
cheated.
I did cheat, but I wanted to make sure they got these numbers correct because they are big numbers. So 236 million global ransomware attacks in the first half of 2022. Ooh. So that's 236 million global ransomware attacks. That's quite a number. And as you say, if you've got digital signage, which hasn't had a security update for the last 10 years because you're using a legacy platform, you are opening a door to be one of those statistics. So there's a lot of IT leaders out there who know this is a challenge, know it's a problem, and we're hopefully here to help solve it.
Florian and Stefan made reference this morning to the software compass and how that was being launched and how they had analyzed, I believe, 27 different software platforms so far, and that it was a little unnerving how little attention was being paid to the security side of things. Is that something that is common?
Yeah, we see it quite a bit, and I think companies know they need to do more, but security, as you can sort of see from the audience here, it's not the most sexy thing to talk about when you're talking about digital signage. You want to talk about content, you want to talk about AI, you want to talk about all of the great things that customers see and the visual side of things. So a lot of money is going into transforming into that kind of AI company and doing the great stuff that the software platforms do. And the poor security guys are there saying, well, actually, we need to get our foundations right. We need the security bits before we start opening the doors to all these good things. So the budgets are being cut from the security to put onto these new features and functions that are coming out. And it's an ongoing problem.
You mentioned that yesterday. I found that shocking that money that's allocated for security is then getting shifted to other things. Like, wouldn't you want to think twice about that?
You would hope so, but as I said, it's not going to be making money. So it's kind of the it won't happen to us kind of mentality. They companies want to get their solutions out. They want it to look great. Is spending money on security top of their mind at that point? No. So that's why we need to help educate those customers to say, absolutely, you can have this, but you need to make sure that great content that people like Trison are delivering is going to be the content that people are seeing, not the naughty videos and other things that could end up on there.
Right. So you're a technology provider. You are customer-facing. You're dealing day-to-day with end users.
Yep.
Is it a concern to them?
Nope.
Next.
No, it isn't, and it should be. But they're lucky because we take it really seriously, and we think it's a priority. I think Craig's completely on the money when he says that it gets put to one side. I think that the truth is that if you're an IT manager, a director in a large corporate, it's slap bang in the middle of your priority list. You're talking about Cisco switches, you're talking about threat identity, risk mitigation, you're going to conferences, you're spending a lot of money on ensuring that your edge is secure. What tends to happen with digital signage is that people start small and they don't really think too much about the security piece because it's not the priority. The priority is prove it works. Is this going to be a success or not in what we do? And bad habits get formed at that small scale because they're not implementing the right technology choices at the very beginning to then deliver a secure environment for their deployment, whichever that is. So there's hundreds of thousands of Windows 7 media players, probably millions out there in the field right now. And the people that have these in their network should be terrified because they really are a massive security risk. They're completely unsupported. They're not getting any Windows updates, and there isn't any real clear path to how they can manage it. I think there's also clear security risks with things like old versions of SSSP and Tizen, which haven't been updated or haven't been managed properly. And the truth is, there's only a few, probably a couple, but certainly one that we use, that the Chrome OS environment, that really do give you a robust platform to deliver a secure space for your content and on your network. I think the other thing that happens is that people don't think about the network infrastructure. They don't think about virtual LANs, and they don't put devices into secure firewalled environments, which again is another pretty significant risk. But you know, your very well thought out opening comment was really probably the most important bit. The human is the biggest risk.
Yes.
The human is the number one threat to your network. And that's why single sign-on matters. That's why password policies matter. Encryption matters. User permissions and privilege policies matter. And software, I mean, Florian and Stefan were talking about the hundreds of software platforms out there. Very few of them are actually in a capable space to manage user permissions and to effectively manage the user policies.
So you've been at this a long time. Used to be Beaver Group. Worked in all kinds of different sectors, primarily retail and food services, right?
Yeah, and corporate, a lot of corporate as well.
What were you using? You know, this is not an ad for Google Chrome OS or anything like that, but I'm curious what you were using before and what led you down the path to using that platform?
Yeah, we were using Windows devices, so predominantly Windows devices. We were actually using Amiga right in the very early days, and I bet there's no one here, maybe one or two. Yeah, here we go. So Amiga was really secure because no one knew about it, so no one hacked that. But anyway, public domain and all the rest of it. But Windows was the platform of choice because there wasn't really anything else. And what made us move? Windows updates, the complete lack of any interest from Microsoft to provide a kiosk-type environment for applications to run, the fact that it's completely reliant on you editing the registry to make it do anything remotely useful, and that even when you've done that, Microsoft would then push out a audio update or something that would appear on hundreds of screens, thousands of screens across your network. So that's why. And I think that drove system on chip, that drove Android, which is a terrible place to be as well, by the way, and moved us into Chrome OS.
I have heard from a number of technical people who've said they've gone to Android because they think it is, they believe strongly that it is secure.
It definitely is. You know, we love Android. They pay a lot of our wages through the phones and things, so absolutely it's a great platform. But it's a great platform for mobile devices. Those devices that you expect to last 2, 3, 4 years. We want this digital signage to last 10 years. That's why we give 10 years of security updates on Chrome OS. You don't get that from an Android platform because it's just not designed to last as long. And talking to any IT people who have got that Android, they'll likely tell you that one of their biggest headaches is patching, and they're buying equipment today, and they know for a fact it's going to be a different version of Android when they buy it again in 6, 7, 8 months' time. So now they're essentially running 2 lots of patching on their platform. So it's just a never-ending project for them to keep it secure.
And Chromium as well.
And Chromium, yeah.
Just on the Chromium thing, I think Samsung is typically 2 years behind on the Chromium version, just because that's the methodology that they've taken to ensure they've got a platform that they can support. And the same is true for quite a lot of other iterations. And so really, you're limiting a lot of the security advances that you've had in those last 2 years by not engaging with the most recent up-to-date version. But then you can also do, fixing the OS version and do long-term, software updates that keep you within a certain space and fully test it and manage it. And I think that's the environment. And, let's face it, most of the really big deployments are run by integrators, and it's the integrators' obligation to ensure that they've got a space that is secure and not just making margin.
Whose responsibility is it, though? I mean, is it ultimately the end user's responsibility, or the integrator, or the platform provider?
I think it's everyone's, right?
Okay.
It is everyone's. We should be being challenged by our customers to have ISO 27000, 27001. We should be demonstrating pen testing. We should be showing that we've put it through the different risk mitigation that you can do. And if they're not asking those questions, we should be telling them.
Mm-hmm. I get those press releases. I write something called 69, and I'll get press releases about SOC 2 or ISO certification, and I don't really entirely know what they are and don't need to, but I'm curious about it. Is it a case of companies getting that and then kind of going, okay, box ticked, we're covered now, and that makes their customers feel better? Or is that just like one thing?
It's methodology, it's a way of thinking, it's systems, and it's renewed. So you have to keep renewing it. So
it gets you in that mindset.
Yeah, and I mean it's the same with all the ISO certifications. Really, they're about demonstrating that you have deep and meaningful systems in place to whether it's deliver projects or manage security or recognise the threats.
One of the things that I wonder about with kind of the shift from visual merchandisers and marketers and business communicators being kind of the people who are driving a digital signage project to now often being the IT department is it's great that they're in the room and they're not just sitting there going, why am I here, and please God let me out. But I wonder when you start to have the projects driven by the IT people, do they start to lose the plot in terms of content and the business message and everything else? Have you run into that?
I think, it used to be the case that IT was driving a lot of these projects in the early days anyway. It's fairly recent.
Begrudgingly.
Told, that it would be a good idea. But actually, marketeers now need help to deploy these systems, and they are, really significant implementations. They are embedded into the systems. We talked about APIs and taking control of EPOS data and everything else, and even if you think about Crestron control and other REST APIs. It's important that the IT people are in there, and yes, it can sometimes become a bit more of an IT-led process. So there's not so much talk about the message and what the objective is and how we're going to measure its success. More, is it a PC? Is it a Chromebox?
Right. And you have to have a broad team in these kinds of planning sessions. It can't just be the IT people. It can't just be the business communicators or whatever. You've got to have everybody at the table. Yeah.
Tenders are really where it comes out the most, I think. So you're generally not around the table. You're generally on a spreadsheet filling it in its most exciting form. But, I mean, Google have sessions like this quite often and invite people, and you address the marketeers and the IT people in the same room, right?
Yes, it's one of the things that we like to think we're quite good at is getting our message across to these kind of people. Definitely the IT teams are in those meetings and having the conversations there. But like you say, there's a broad spectrum of people that go into those meetings now, and we're seeing a lot of the new sustainability officers coming in as well, because they want to make sure that they get their piece in, especially with the new regulations across the EU and energy consumption and reports and things. They need to make sure that they're doing their bit as well. So I think the audience is changing to who we're selling to. Definitely the marketing, driving the messages, but IT helping them to see if it's successful through the integrations to the POS and the various other pieces. And then the sustainability team want to make sure that it's green.
Is this an operating expense? Is this something that, as you're planning out a network or planning to refurbish a network, that you need to factor in a certain, I'm not asking for a number, but but you have to think about that as well, in the same way that you're budgeting for hardware, you're budgeting for creative, you need to budget for security?
I think it's vitally important. I think the biggest threat to companies is the one that they don't know about yet, because you can't fight something you don't know. So they need to be ready and having that budget available to make sure that they've got that security in place for when those threats come out. By deploying something like Chrome OS or Chrome OS Flex into the network, you're kind of getting ahead of the game there, because of all the unique security features that come with using Chrome OS.
Mm-hmm.
Just on that, I mean, from our perspective, I want to outsource that piece to Google. So that's something, we don't have, millions, let alone billions, to invest in, threat identity and risk mitigation on that kind of level. And I want as clean and as simple an environment to work within that's as locked down as possible and can do as little as possible. And I think that sometimes the mistake is that devices are deployed that can do lots and have lots of capability, but really actually you just want them to show some video and some JPEGs and some HTML in some layouts, and that's actually not a complex thing to do. So to your point about does that have an impact on cost, I think it can have a benefit to cost, because if you identify the most efficient and the leanest environment to work in that's the most secure, you actually only need a Celeron processor. You don't need an i3 or an i5 processor. And you then put everything else out on the edge or the cloud, and you allow the big G to have its mega hosting centers and multi-backup environments and resilience that you rely on because it's reliable.
Pun completely unintended, but is working with something like a Google security blanket, like it makes the customer feel
He was
better
last night. There was a little bit of resting on the shoulder.
The perils of old-fashioned.
Yeah. I guess, yes. And it is a double-edged sword, because whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Google, they do things and change stuff and remove things. And I mean, Craig won't mind me telling you, there's the Google graveyard, which is a fascinating insight into all the cool things that don't exist anymore. And we've been victim to that a little bit.
Right.
We've had impacts. We're moving to a PWA environment at the moment because Chrome apps are being sunsetted. And it's not always the case that all of the functionality we need is in the PWA space. That's something we're working on with Google, and that's the relationship that we have. But yes, it does give you... I don't worry about security on those devices.
But with your customers, I think you work with GridServe.
Yeah, and people like Whitbread and others. And you talk about it, and I think it is a tick box at that point.
Right. But do they feel better saying, look, we're working with Google on this with all of their hardware, all of their resources and everything else. This is not a security platform or program that we've just put together ourselves, and Bob and Wally over in the corner did that.
Yeah, I think when we say... they didn't used to understand as much as they do now. I think Chrome OS is a much wider understood environment than it used to be. It's quite a short conversation, to be honest with you, because you just say it can't do anything else. And if something did happen, it would be rebooted immediately and compared to the mirror of the whole system that's on the system. And if there's any data that's different, the whole thing gets power washed, and it's just not possible. So there's a bounty of $1 million for someone that can demonstrate they can break it, and it's been there for 12 years now. And there's people trying all the time. So that environment is really, really important to people, but it's a simple conversation because you're telling them it's entirely enclosed.
endless discussions here and everywhere about AI and what it can do for digital signage, but it could also be what it can do to digital signage and to a digital signage network. I find it interesting because with deep fakes and generative voices and everything else, I was saying to Craig last night that if I have an issue with something to do with my banking, I will call the contact center and they have a voice print of my voice. And they'll say, okay, you're verified, it's you. Maybe that's not the case with AI, that my voice can be cloned. So how are you guys looking at AI? I know there's all the opportunity, but there's incredible risk, I would imagine.
I think so. One of the key things in the Chrome OS world is we have what we call zero trust. So a lot of people are verified trust, or they go through a process of that. We have zero trust, so nothing can be logged into or done without being verified. So the applications just won't run. So what we need to do is keep working with our AI teams and our product teams to make sure that that policy and that mentality goes across everything as it's being developed and rolled out. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's ongoing project, I think.
Yeah. So if I am an end user and I'm looking to expand my digital signage network or get it going, what are those questions I should be asking and the things I should be thinking about?
Thank you. Well, there's a long list, Dave. How long you got? 7 minutes, okay. I think if I was an end user and I was thinking about the infrastructure questions, it would depend where you are. Is physical, like if you're in an airport and you've got a large LED, you're in a fairly secure space because the media player will be in a rack behind doors and with other IT equipment. If you're in a QSR in the middle of London or Paris, you're likely to have a media player behind the screens, or even just a system on chip. Mm-hmm. So the questions are varied depending on the environment that you're going to actually be deploying in, and the types of people and the time of day that this equipment will be around people. Mm-hmm. So thinking about that physical threat, I mean, the USB stick in the side of a Samsung screen is your number one, risk, I think, if you're going to put smart screens out in the field. So you need to disable that. But also, if you're thinking about the broader questions, I think you need to think about, is it going to be on its own network? Are you going to be using, in the case of a lot of our customers, actually, we do have completely open to the internet, but we use the Chromebox as the security device, mm-hmm. And we're then using servers and cloud for the other piece. So it's just a pipe. But a lot of customers will want to have more security than that and want it on VLAN that they manage. There are some, we work with some defense companies who you can't do anything that's connected, full stop.
Everything's air-gapped.
Everything's air-gapped, yeah. So then you're talking about enterprise level, Scala type implementations. And to be honest with you, there's not many. So Scala tends to be the one that can be put into that sort of space. And
by that you mean on-premise, purely
on-premise,
on-prem?
pure on-prem,
okay.
With its own content servers and its own, interaction for designer and that sort of thing. So there isn't a clear set of, A to Z. I did that for you, questions. It's more about, I think, identifying the endpoints that you're going to be putting in, where they're going to be, and do you need to think about, mm-hmm. The network security more than the physical security. But as I say, having an infrastructure platform that gives you a baseline to work from is really important.
And Craig, is it an isolated situation if there's a security or penetration of some kind at let's say at a QSR restaurant in Leicester, England? It's not isolated to Leicester, England if it's a SaaS-based network, is it?
Depends on the security infrastructure you got in there, but with Chrome OS and the PWA applications which we're using now, everything is sandboxed. So if that thing happens in Leicester on that particular tab, it is stuck in that particular tab. It can't get out of that network. So one of the really important stuff for us is that we do isolate those things if they do happen, and make sure that they can't go across the networks.
But that's when they're using Chrome OS.
That's right.
If they're not using Chrome OS, like one little incident in one location is not one little incident in one location, right?
That's exactly right, yeah. So it could be very easy for these unprotected systems to get complete ransomware, which is the case that happened with Strawberry Hotels in the Nordics a little while back. They were the Nordic Choice Hotel. They had a ransomware attack which locked them out of every device in their hotel portfolio. Luckily for them, they were already going down the line of Chrome OS and Chrome OS Flex. So over the course of 48 hours, they managed to flex 2,000 devices from the ransomware issues, and they were back up and running over essentially a weekend.
Any questions from the audience? I'm happy to run down and give you a microphone. Yes.
I think I'm fine without microphone. What I find really Thank you. What I find really interesting, I mean, you were talking about different operating systems, and I mean, Windows, yes, I have a topic with all the updates, but you were totally not mentioning Linux as an operating system, which from my point of view is the one that is perfectly remote controllable, extremely easy to harden again, security topics and so on. So why this was not a potential alternative for you?
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, it's a good question, and we do use it here and there. We don't use it broadly, and the reason I think is because Chrome OS is actually a Linux-based OS anyway, so we're benefiting from that environment. And I agree, it's the best of the bunch. It's definitely the most secure. Linux itself does suffer a little from having multiple versions, and it can be a little bit scaffoldy with different plugins and things that go around it. And I think as a enterprise grade solution for us when we were thinking about how many thousands of endpoints we would have and how we manage the updates and everything else, and how those user accounts are managed and how the licensing is, it is a cost. There's obviously a license fee for Chrome OS, but it outsources that piece. And I've got some really clever people in our business, but you know yourself, they tend to move on and do other things. So much like we are an outsourced expert to our customers, and we mitigate that risk by outsourcing it to Google and Chrome OS, I've mitigated to some degree that risk of the Linux thing. But you're completely right, it is a fantastic environment, but for us it probably wasn't scalable in the sense that it's a managed environment for us. It was a choice that we would rather use it in the Chrome OS environment.
Is it kind of a case of this allows you to stick to what you're good at?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, do what you do best and let other people do what they do best.
Right. All right, we're pretty much out of time, so thank you very much for attending, and thank you guys for hopefully raised my level of understanding at least.
It's been emotional. I've loved it. It's been really great.
All right, thank you.